Selected works of Mao Zedong,
not available
Volume
on YouTube.
3.
Visit the links
The
in the
Period of the
description
War
below.
of Resistance
Thank you
Against
for your
Japan,
support.
Part 2. Section 8. Talks at the YENAN Forum on Literature and Art. May 1942. Introduction. May 2nd, 1942. Comrades. You have been invited to this forum today to exchange ideas and examine the relationship between work in the literary and artistic fields and revolutionary work in general. Our aim is to ensure that revolutionary literature and art follow the correct path of development and provide better help to other revolutionary work in facilitating the overthrow of our national enemy and the accomplishment of the task of national liberation. In our struggle for the liberation of the Chinese people, there are various fronts, among which there are the fronts of the pen and of the gun, the cultural, and the military fronts. To defeat the enemy, we must rely primarily on the army with guns. But this army alone is not enough. We must also have a cultural army, which is absolutely indispensable for uniting our own ranks and defeating the enemy. Since the May 4th movement, such a cultural army has taken shape in China, and it has helped the Chinese Revolution gradually reduce the domain of China's feudal culture and of the comprador culture which serves imperialist aggression, and weakened their influence. To oppose the new culture, the Chinese reactionaries can now only pit quantity against quality. In other words, reactionaries have money, and though they can produce nothing good, they can go all out and produce in quantity. Literature and art have been an important and successful part of the cultural front since the May 4th movement. During the 10 years Civil War, the revolutionary literature and art movement grew greatly. That movement and the Revolutionary War both headed in the same general direction, but these two fraternal armies were not linked together in their practical work because the reactionaries had cut them off from each other. It is very good that since the outbreak of the War of Resistance against Japan, more and more revolutionary writers and artists have been coming to YENAN and our other anti-Japanese base areas. But it does not necessarily follow that, having come to the base areas, they have already integrated themselves completely with the masses of the people here. The two must be completely integrated if we are to push ahead with our revolutionary work. The purpose of our meeting today is precisely to ensure that literature and art fit well into the whole revolutionary machine as a component part, that they operate as powerful weapons for uniting and educating the people and for attacking and destroying the enemy, and that they help the people fight the enemy with one heart and one mind. What are the problems that must be solved to achieve this objective? I think they are the problems of the class stand of the writers and artists, their attitude, their audience, their work, and their study. The problem of class stand. Our stand is that of the proletariat and of the masses. For members of the Communist Party, this means keeping to the stand of the party, keeping to party spirit and party policy. Are there any of our literary and art workers who are still mistaken or not clear in their understanding of this problem? I think there are. Many of our comrades have frequently departed from the correct stand. The problem of attitude. From one stand, there follow specific attitudes toward specific matters. For instance, is one to extol or to expose? This is a question of attitude. Which attitude is wanted? I would say both. The question is, whom are you dealing with? There are three kinds of persons: the enemy, our allies in the united front, and our own people. The last are the masses and their vanguard. We need to adopt a different attitude towards each of the three. With regard to the enemy, that is, Japanese imperialism and all the other enemies of the people, the task of revolutionary writers and artists is to expose their duplicity and cruelty, and at the same time to point out the inevitability of their defeat, so as to encourage the anti-Japanese army and people to fight staunchly with one heart and one mind for their overthrow. With regard to our different allies in the United Front, our attitude should be one of both alliance and criticism, and there should be different kinds of alliance and different kinds of criticism. We support them in their resistance to Japan and praise them for any achievement, but if they are not active in the war of resistance, we should criticize them. If anyone opposes the Communist Party and the people and keeps moving down the path of reaction, we will firmly oppose him. As for the masses of the people, their toil and their struggle, their army and their party, we should certainly praise them. The people too have their shortcomings. Among the proletariat, many retain petty bourgeois ideas, while both the peasants and the urban petty bourgeoisie have backward ideas. These are burdens hampering them in their struggle. We should be patient and spend a long time in educating them and helping them to get these loads off their backs and combat their own shortcomings and errors, so that they can advance with great strides. They have remolded themselves in struggle or are doing so, and our literature and art should depict this process. As long as they do not persist in their errors, we should not dwell on their negative side and consequently make the mistake of ridiculing them, or worse still, of being hostile to them. Our writing should help them to unite, to make progress, to press ahead with one heart and one mind, to discard what is backward and develop what is revolutionary, and should certainly not do the opposite. The problem of audience, i.e., the people for whom our works of literature and art are produced. In the Shensi-Kansu Ningxia border region and the anti-Japanese base areas of northern and central China, this problem differs from that in the Kuomintang areas, and differs still more from that in Shanghai before the War of Resistance. In the Shanghai period, the audience for works of revolutionary literature and art consisted mainly of a section of the students, office workers, and shop assistants. After the outbreak of the War of Resistance, the audience in the Kuomintang areas became somewhat wider, but it still consisted mainly of the same kind of people, because the government there prevented the workers, peasants, and soldiers from having access to revolutionary literature and art. In our base areas, the situation is entirely different. Here, the audience for works of literature and art consists of workers, peasants, soldiers, and revolutionary cadres. There are students in the base areas too, but they are different from students of the old type. They are either former or future cadres. The cadres of all types, fighters in the army, workers in the factories, and peasants in the villages, all want to read books and newspapers once they become literate, and those who are illiterate want to see plays and operas, look at drawings and paintings, sing songs and hear music. They are the audience for our works of literature and art. Take the cadres alone. Do not think they are few. They far outnumber the readers of any book published in the Kuomintang areas. There, an edition usually runs to only 2,000 copies, and even 3 editions add up to only 6,000. But as for the cadres in the base areas, in YENAN alone, there are more than 10,000 who read books. Many of them, moreover, are tempered revolutionaries of long standing, who have come from all parts of the country and will go out to work in different places, so it is very important to do educational work among them. Our literary and art workers must do a good job in this respect. Since the audience for our literature and art consists of workers, peasants, and soldiers, and of their cadres, the problem arises of understanding them and knowing them well. A great deal of work has to be done in order to understand them and know them well, to understand and know well all the different kinds of people and phenomena in the party and government organizations, in the villages and factories, and in the 8th Route and New 4th Armies. Our writers and artists have their literary and art work to do, but their primary task is to understand people and know them well. In this regard, how have matters stood with our writers and artists? I would say they have been lacking in knowledge and understanding. They have been like a hero with no place to display his prowess. What does lacking in knowledge mean? Not knowing people well. The writers and artists do not have a good knowledge either of those whom they describe or of their audience. Indeed, they may hardly know them at all. They do not know the workers or peasants or soldiers well, and do not know the cadres well either. What does lacking in understanding mean? Not understanding the language, that is, not being familiar with the rich, lively language of the masses. Since many writers and artists stand aloof from the masses and lead empty lives, naturally they are unfamiliar with the language of the people. Accordingly, their works are not only insipid in language, but often contain nondescript expressions of their own coining, which run counter to popular usage. Many comrades like to talk about a mass style. But what does it really mean? It means that the thoughts and feelings of our writers and artists should be fused with those of the masses of workers, peasants, and soldiers. To achieve this fusion, they should conscientiously learn the language of the masses. How can you talk of literary and artistic creation if you find the very language of the masses largely incomprehensible? By a hero with no place to display his prowess, we mean that your collection of great truths is not appreciated by the masses. The more you put on the airs of a veteran before the masses and play the hero, the more you try to peddle such stuff to the masses, the less likely they are to accept it. If you want the masses to understand you, if you want to be one with the masses, you must make up your mind to undergo a long and even painful process of tempering. Here I might mention the experience of how my own feelings changed. I began life as a student, and at school acquired the ways of a student. I then used to feel it undignified to do even a little manual labor, such as carrying my own luggage in the presence of my fellow students, who were incapable of carrying anything, either on their shoulders or in their hands. At that time, I felt that intellectuals were the only clean people in the world, while in comparison, workers and peasants were dirty. I did not mind wearing the clothes of other intellectuals, believing them clean, but I would not put on clothes belonging to a worker or peasant, believing them dirty. But after I became a revolutionary and lived with workers and peasants, and with soldiers of the Revolutionary Army, I gradually came to know them well, and they gradually came to know me well too. It was then, and only then, that I fundamentally changed the bourgeois and petty bourgeois feelings implanted in me in the bourgeois schools. I came to feel that compared with the workers and peasants, the unremolded intellectuals were not clean, and that in the last analysis, the workers and peasants were the cleanest people, and even though their hands were soiled and their feet smeared with cow dung, they were really cleaner than the bourgeois and petty bourgeois intellectuals. That is what is meant by a change in feelings, a change from one class to another. If our writers and artists who come from the intelligentsia want their works to be well received by the masses, they must change and remold their thinking and their feelings. Without such a change, without such remolding, they can do nothing well and will be misfits. The last problem is study, by which I mean the study of Marxism-Leninism and of society. Anyone who considers himself a revolutionary Marxist writer, and especially any writer who is a member of the Communist Party, must have a knowledge of Marxism-Leninism. At present, however, some comrades are lacking in the basic concepts of Marxism. For instance, it is a basic Marxist concept that being determines consciousness, that the objective realities of class struggle and national struggle determine our thoughts and feelings. But some of our comrades turn this upside down and maintain that everything ought to start from love. Now, as for love, in a class society, there can be only class love. But these comrades are seeking a love transcending classes, love in the abstract, and also freedom in the abstract, truth in the abstract, human nature in the abstract, etc. This shows that they have been very deeply influenced by the bourgeoisie. They should thoroughly rid themselves of this influence and modestly study Marxism-Leninism. It is right for writers and artists to study literary and artistic creation, but the science of Marxism-Leninism must be studied by all revolutionaries, writers and artists not excepted. Writers and artists should study society, that is to say, should study the various classes in society, their mutual relations and respective conditions, their physiognomy and their psychology. Only when we grasp all this clearly can we have a literature and art that is rich in content and correct in orientation. I am merely raising these problems today by way of introduction. I hope all of you will express your views on these and other relevant problems. Conclusion. May 23, 1942. Comrades, our forum has had 3 meetings this month. In the pursuit of truth, we have carried on spirited debates in which scores of party and non-party comrades have spoken, laying bare the issues and making them more concrete. This, I believe, will very much benefit the whole literary and artistic movement. In discussing a problem, we should start from reality and not from definitions. We would be following a wrong method if we first looked up definitions of literature and art in textbooks and then used them to determine the guiding principles for the present-day literary and artistic movement, and to judge the different opinions and controversies that arise today. We are Marxists, and Marxism teaches that in our approach to a problem, we should start from objective facts, not from abstract definitions, and that we should derive our guiding principles, policies, and measures from an analysis of these facts. We should do the same in our present discussion of literary and artistic work. What are the facts at present? The facts are the war of resistance against Japan, which China has been fighting for 5 years, the worldwide anti-fascist war, the vacillations of China's big landlord class and big bourgeoisie in the war of resistance and their policy of high-handed oppression of the people, the revolutionary movement in literature and art since the May 4th movement, its great contributions to the revolution during the last 23 years and its many shortcomings, the anti-Japanese democratic base areas of the 8th Route and New Fourth Armies, and the integration of large numbers of writers and artists with these armies and with the workers and peasants in these areas, the difference in both environment and tasks between the writers and artists in the base areas and those in the Kuomintang areas, and the controversial issues concerning literature and art which have arisen in YENAN and the other anti-Japanese base areas. These are the actual, undeniable facts in the light of which we have to consider our problems. What then is the crux of the matter? In my opinion, it consists fundamentally of the problems of working for the masses and how to work for the masses. Unless these 2 problems are solved, or solved properly, our writers and artists will be ill-adapted to their environment and their tasks, and will come up against a series of difficulties from without and within. My concluding remarks will center on these 2 problems, and also touch upon some related ones. The first problem is literature and art for whom? This problem was solved long ago by Marxists, especially by Lenin. As far back as 1905, Lenin pointed out emphatically that our literature and art should serve the millions and tens of millions of working people. C.V.I. Lenin, Party Organization and Party Literature, in which he described the characteristics of proletarian literature as follows.
It will be a free literature because the idea of socialism and sympathy with the working people, and not greed or careerism, will bring ever new forces to its ranks. It will be a free literature because it will serve not some satiated heroine, not the bored upper 10,000 suffering from fatty degeneration, but the millions and tens of millions of working people, the flower of the country, its strength and its future. It will be a free literature, enriching the last word in the revolutionary thought of mankind with the experience and living work of the socialist proletariat, bringing about permanent interaction between the experience of the past, scientific socialism, the completion of the development of socialism from its primitive utopian forms, and the experience of the present struggle of the worker comrades.
For comrades engaged in literary and artistic work in the anti-Japanese base areas, it might seem that this problem is already solved and needs no further discussion. Actually, that is not the case. Many comrades have not found a clear solution. Consequently, their sentiments, their works, their actions, and their views on the guiding principles for literature and art have inevitably been more or less at variance with the needs of the masses and of the practical struggle. Of course, among the numerous men of culture, writers, artists, and other literary and artistic workers engaged in the great struggle for liberation, together with the Communist Party and the Eighth Route and New Fourth Armies, a few may be careerists who are with us only temporarily, but the overwhelming majority are working energetically for the common cause. By relying on these comrades, we have achieved a great deal in our literature, drama, music, and fine arts. Many of these writers and artists have begun their work since the outbreak of the War of Resistance. Many others did much revolutionary work before the war, endured many hardships, and influenced broad masses of the people by their activities and works. Why do we say, then, that even among these comrades, there are some who have not reached a clear solution of the problem of whom literature and art are for? Is it conceivable that there are still some who maintain that revolutionary literature and art are not for the masses of the people but for the exploiters and oppressors? Indeed, literature and art exist which are for the exploiters and oppressors. Literature and art for the landlord class are feudal literature and art. Such were the literature and art of the ruling class in China's feudal era. To this day, such literature and art still have considerable influence in China. Literature and art for the bourgeoisie are bourgeois literature and art. People like Liang Shiqiu, whom Lu Xun criticized, talk about literature and art as transcending classes, but in fact, they uphold bourgeois literature and art, and oppose proletarian literature and art. Liang Shiqiu, a member of the counter-revolutionary National Socialist Party, for a long time propagated reactionary American bourgeois ideas on literature and art. He stubbornly opposed the revolution and reviled revolutionary literature and art. Then literature and art exist, which serve the imperialists, for example, the works of Chou Tso-jen, Chang Tzu-ping, and their like, which we call traitor literature and art. Chou Tso-jen and Chang Tzu-ping capitulated to the Japanese aggressors after the Japanese occupied Peking and Shanghai in 1937. With us, literature and art are for the people, not for any of the above groups. We have said that China's new culture at the present stage is an anti-imperialist, anti-feudal culture of the masses of the people under the leadership of the proletariat. Today, anything that is truly of the masses must necessarily be led by the proletariat. Whatever is under the leadership of the bourgeoisie cannot possibly be of the masses. Naturally, the same applies to the new literature and art, which are part of the new culture. We should take over the rich legacy and the good traditions in literature and art that have been handed down from past ages in China and foreign countries. But the aim must still be to serve the masses of the people. Nor do we refuse to utilize the literary and artistic forms of the past, but in our hands, these old forms, remolded and infused with new content, also become something revolutionary in the service of the people. Who, then, are the masses of the people? The broadest sections of the people, constituting more than 90% of our total population, are the workers, peasants, soldiers, and urban petty bourgeoisie. Therefore, our literature and art are first for the workers, the class that leads the revolution. Secondly, they are for the peasants, the most numerous and most steadfast of our allies in the revolution. Thirdly, they are for the armed workers and peasants, namely, the 8th Route and New 4th Armies, and the other armed units of the people, which are the main forces of the Revolutionary War. Fourthly, they are for the laboring masses of the urban petty bourgeoisie, and for the petty bourgeois intellectuals, both of whom are also our allies in the revolution and capable of long-term cooperation with us. These four kinds of people constitute the overwhelming majority of the Chinese nation, the broadest masses of the people. Our literature and art should be for the four kinds of people we have enumerated. To serve them, we must take the class stand of the proletariat, and not that of the petty bourgeoisie. Today, writers who cling to an individualist, petty bourgeois stand cannot truly serve the masses of revolutionary workers, peasants, and soldiers. Their interest is mainly focused on the small number of petty bourgeois intellectuals. This is the crucial reason why some of our comrades cannot correctly solve the problem of for whom. In saying this, I am not referring to theory. In theory or in words, no one in our ranks regards the masses of workers, peasants, and soldiers as less important than the petty bourgeois intellectuals. I am referring to practice, to action. In practice, in action, do they regard petty bourgeois intellectuals as more important than workers, peasants, and soldiers? I think they do. Many comrades concern themselves with studying the petty bourgeois intellectuals and analyzing their psychology, and they concentrate on portraying these intellectuals and excusing or defending their shortcomings, instead of guiding the intellectuals to join with them in getting closer to the masses of workers, peasants, and soldiers, taking part in the practical struggles of the masses, portraying and educating the masses. Coming from the petty bourgeoisie and being themselves intellectuals, many comrades seek friends only among intellectuals and concentrate on studying and describing them. Such study and description are proper if done from a proletarian position. But that is not what they do, or not what they do fully. They take the petty bourgeois stand and produce works that are the self-expression of the petty bourgeoisie, as can be seen in quite a number of literary and artistic products. Often they show heartfelt sympathy for intellectuals of petty bourgeois origin, to the extent of sympathizing with or even praising their shortcomings. On the other hand, these comrades seldom come into contact with the masses of workers, peasants, and soldiers, do not understand or study them, do not have intimate friends among them, and are not good at portraying them. When they do depict them, the clothes are the clothes of working people, but the faces are those of petty bourgeois intellectuals. In certain respects, they are fond of the workers, peasants, and soldiers, and the cadres stemming from them. But there are times when they do not like them, and there are some respects in which they do not like them. They do not like their feelings or their manner or their nascent literature and art. The wall newspapers, murals, folk songs, folk tales, etc. At times they are fond of these things too, but that is when they are hunting for novelty, for something with which to embellish their own works, or even for certain backward features. At other times, they openly despise these things and are partial to what belongs to the petty bourgeois intellectuals or even to the bourgeoisie. These comrades have their feet planted on the side of the petty bourgeois intellectuals. Or, to put it more elegantly, their innermost soul is still a kingdom of the petty bourgeois intelligentsia. Thus, they have not yet solved, or not yet clearly solved, the problem of for whom. This applies not only to newcomers to YENAN. Even among comrades who have been to the front and worked for a number of years in our base areas and in the 8th Route and New 4th Armies, many have not completely solved this problem. It requires a long period of time, at least 8 or 10 years to solve it thoroughly. But however long it takes, solve it we must, and solve it unequivocally and thoroughly. Our literary and art workers must accomplish this task and shift their stand. They must gradually move their feet over to the side of the workers, peasants and soldiers, to the side of the proletariat, through the process of going into their very midst and into the thick of practical struggles, and through the process of studying Marxism and society. Only in this way can we have a literature and art that are truly for the workers, peasants, and soldiers, a truly proletarian literature and art. This question of for whom is fundamental. It is a question of principle. The controversies and divergences, the opposition and disunity arising among some comrades in the past were not on this fundamental question of principle, but on secondary questions, or even on issues involving no principle. On this question of principle, however, there has been hardly any divergence between the two contending sides, and they have shown almost complete agreement. To some extent, both tend to look down upon the workers, peasants, and soldiers, and divorce themselves from the masses. I say, to some extent, because generally speaking, these comrades do not look down upon the workers, peasants, and soldiers, or divorce themselves from the masses in the same way as the Kuomintang does. Nevertheless, the tendency is there. Unless this fundamental problem is solved, many other problems will not be easy to solve. Take, for instance, the sectarianism in literary and art circles. This too is a question of principle, but sectarianism can only be eradicated by putting forward and faithfully applying the slogans for the workers and peasants, for the Eighth Route and New Fourth Armies, and go among the masses. Otherwise, the problem of sectarianism can never be solved. Lu Xun once said,
"A common aim is the prerequisite for a united front. The fact that our front is not united shows that we have not been able to unify our aims, and that some people are working only for small groups or indeed only for themselves. If we all aim at serving the masses of workers and peasants, our front will of course be united."
The problem existed then in Shanghai. Now it exists in Chongqing too. In such places, the problem can hardly be solved thoroughly, because the rulers oppress the revolutionary writers and artists, and deny them the freedom to go out among the masses of workers, peasants, and soldiers. Here with us, the situation is entirely different. We encourage revolutionary writers and artists to be active in forming intimate contacts with the workers, peasants, and soldiers, giving them complete freedom to go among the masses and to create a genuinely revolutionary literature and art. Therefore, here among us the problem is nearing solution. But nearing solution is not the same as a complete and thorough solution. We must study Marxism and study society, as we have been saying, precisely in order to achieve a complete and thorough solution. By Marxism we mean living Marxism, which plays an effective role in the life and struggle of the masses, not Marxism in words. With Marxism in words transformed into Marxism in real life, there will be no more sectarianism. Not only will the problem of sectarianism be solved, but many other problems as well. Having settled the problem of whom to serve, we come to the next problem, how to serve. To put it in the words of some of our comrades, should we devote ourselves to raising standards, or should we devote ourselves to popularization? In the past, some comrades, to a certain or even a serious extent, belittled and neglected popularization and laid undue stress on raising standards. Stress should be laid on raising standards, but to do so one-sidedly and exclusively, to do so excessively, is a mistake. The lack of a clear solution to the problem of for whom, which I referred to earlier, also manifests itself in this connection. As these comrades are not clear on the problem of for whom, they have no correct criteria for the raising of standards and the popularization they speak of, and are naturally still less able to find the correct relationship between the two. Since our literature and art are basically for the workers, peasants, and soldiers, popularization means to popularize among the workers, peasants, and soldiers, and raising standards means to advance from their present level. What should we popularize among them? Popularize what is needed and can be readily accepted by the feudal landlord class? Popularize what is needed and can be readily accepted by the bourgeoisie? Popularize what is needed and can be readily accepted by the petty bourgeois intellectuals? No, none of these will do. We must popularize only what is needed and can be readily accepted by the workers, peasants, and soldiers themselves. Consequently, prior to the task of educating the workers, peasants, and soldiers, there is the task of learning from them. This is even more true of raising standards. There must be a basis from which to raise. Take a bucket of water, for instance. Where is it to be raised from, if not from the ground? From mid-air? From what basis, then, are literature and art to be raised? From the basis of the feudal classes? From the basis of the bourgeoisie? From the basis of the petty bourgeois intellectuals? No, not from any of these. Only from the basis of the masses of workers, peasants, and soldiers. Nor does this mean raising the workers, peasants, and soldiers to the heights of the feudal classes, the bourgeoisie or the petty bourgeois intellectuals. It means raising the level of literature and art in the direction in which the workers, peasants, and soldiers are themselves advancing, in the direction in which the proletariat is advancing. Here again, the task of learning from the workers, peasants, and soldiers comes in. Only by starting from the workers, peasants, and soldiers can we have a correct understanding of popularization and of the raising of standards and find the proper relationship between the two. In the last analysis, what is the source of all literature and art? Works of literature and art, as ideological forms, are products of the reflection in the human brain of the life of a given society. Revolutionary literature and art are the products of the reflection of the life of the people in the brains of revolutionary writers and artists. The life of the people is always a mine of the raw materials for literature and art, materials in their natural form, materials that are crude, but most vital, rich, and fundamental. They make all literature and art seem pallid by comparison. They provide literature and art with an inexhaustible source, their only source. They are the only source, for there can be no other. Some may ask, is there not another source in books, in the literature and art of ancient times and of foreign countries? In fact, the literary and artistic works of the past are not a source, but a stream. They were created by our predecessors and the foreigners out of the literary and artistic raw materials they found in the life of the people of their time and place. We must take over all the fine things in our literary and artistic heritage, critically assimilate whatever is beneficial, and use them as examples when we create works out of the literary and artistic raw materials in the life of the people of our own time and place. It makes a difference whether or not we have such examples, the difference between crudeness and refinement, between roughness and polish, between a low and a high level, and between slower and faster work. Therefore, we must on no account reject the legacies of the ancients and the foreigners, or refuse to learn from them, even though they are the works of the feudal or bourgeois classes. But taking over legacies and using them as examples must never replace our own creative work. Nothing can do that. Uncritical transplantation, or copying from the ancients and the foreigners, is the most sterile and harmful dogmatism in literature and art. China's revolutionary writers and artists of promise, must go among the masses. They must for a long period of time unreservedly and wholeheartedly go among the masses of workers, peasants, and soldiers, go into the heat of the struggle, go to the only source, the broadest and richest source, in order to observe experience, study, and analyze all the different kinds of people, all the classes, all the masses, all the vivid patterns of life and struggle, all the raw materials of literature and art. Only then can they proceed to creative work. Otherwise, you will have nothing to work with, and you will be nothing but a phony writer or artist, the kind that Lu Xun in his will so earnestly cautioned his son never to become. Although man's social life is the only source of literature and art, and is incomparably livelier and richer in content, the people are not satisfied with life alone, and demand literature and art as well. Why? Because while both are beautiful, life as reflected in works of literature and art can and ought to be on a higher plane, more intense, more concentrated, more typical, nearer the ideal, and therefore more universal than actual everyday life. Revolutionary literature and art should create a variety of characters out of real life and help the masses to propel history forward. For example, there is suffering from hunger, cold, and oppression on the one hand, and exploitation and oppression of man by man on the other. These facts exist everywhere, and people look upon them as commonplace. Writers and artists concentrate such everyday phenomena, typify the contradictions and struggles within them, and produce works which awaken the masses, fire them with enthusiasm, and impel them to unite and struggle to transform their environment. Without such literature and art, this task could not be fulfilled, or at least not so effectively and speedily. What is meant by popularizing and by raising standards in works of literature and art? What is the relationship between these two tasks? Popular works are simpler and plainer, and therefore more readily accepted by the broad masses of the people today. Works of a higher quality, being more polished, are more difficult to produce, and in general do not circulate so easily and quickly among the masses at present. The problem facing the workers, peasants, and soldiers is this: they are now engaged in a bitter and bloody struggle with the enemy, but are illiterate and uneducated as a result of long years of rule by the feudal and bourgeois classes, and therefore they are eagerly demanding enlightenment, education, and works of literature and art which meet their urgent needs and which are easy to absorb, in order to heighten their enthusiasm in struggle and confidence in victory, strengthen their unity, and fight the enemy with one heart and one mind. For them, the prime need is not more flowers on the brocade, but fuel in snowy weather. In present conditions, therefore, popularization is the more pressing task. It is wrong to belittle or neglect popularization. Nevertheless, no hard and fast line can be drawn between popularization and the raising of standards. Not only is it possible to popularize some works of higher quality even now, but the cultural level of the broad masses is steadily rising. If popularization remains at the same level forever, with the same stuff being supplied month after month and year after year, always the same little cowherd, and the same man, hand, mouth, knife, cow, goat, will not the educators and those being educated be 6 of one and half a dozen of the other? The Little Cowherd is a popular Chinese folk operetta with only 2 people acting in it, a cowherd and a village girl, who sing a question and answer duet. In the early days of the War of Resistance against Japan, this form was used with new words for anti-Japanese propaganda and for a time found great favor with the public. The Chinese characters for the words man, hand, mouth, knife, cow, goat are written simply with only a few strokes and were usually included in the first lessons in old primers. What would be the sense of such popularization? The people demand popularization and, following that, higher standards. They demand higher standards month by month and year by year. Here, popularization means popularizing for the people, and raising of standards means raising the level for the people. And such raising is not from mid-air or behind closed doors, but is actually based on popularization. It is determined by, and at the same time, guides popularization. In China as a whole, the development of the revolution and of revolutionary culture is uneven, and their spread is gradual. While in one place there is popularization and then raising of standards on the basis of popularization, in other places popularization has not even begun. Hence, good experience in popularization, leading to higher standards in one locality, can be applied in other localities and serve to guide popularization and the raising of standards there, saving many twists and turns along the road. Internationally, the good experience of foreign countries, and especially Soviet experience, can also serve to guide us. With us, therefore, the raising of standards is based on popularization, while popularization is guided by the raising of standards. Precisely for this reason, so far from being an obstacle to the raising of standards, the work of popularization we are speaking of supplies the basis for the work of raising standards which we are now doing on a limited scale, and prepares the necessary conditions for us to raise standards in the future on a much broader scale. Besides such raising of standards as meets the needs of the masses directly, there is the kind which meets their needs indirectly, that is, the kind which is needed by the cadres. The cadres are the advanced elements of the masses, and generally have received more education. Literature and art of a higher level are entirely necessary for them. To ignore this would be a mistake. Whatever is done for the cadres is also entirely for the masses, because it is only through the cadres that we can educate and guide the masses. If we go against this aim, if what we give the cadres cannot help them educate and guide the masses, our work of raising standards will be like shooting at random and will depart from the fundamental principle of serving the masses of the people. To sum up, through the creative labor of revolutionary writers and artists, the raw materials found in the life of the people are shaped into the ideological form of literature and art serving the masses of the people. Included here are the more advanced literature and art as developed on the basis of elementary literature and art, and as required by those sections of the masses whose level has been raised, or more immediately, by the cadres among the masses. Also included here are elementary literature and art, which conversely are guided by more advanced literature and art, and are needed primarily by the overwhelming majority of the masses at present. Whether more advanced or elementary, all our literature and art are for the masses of the people, and in the first place, for the workers, peasants, and soldiers. They are created for the workers, peasants, and soldiers, and are for their use. Now that we have settled the problem of the relationship between the raising of standards and popularization, that of the relationship between the specialists and the popularizers can also be settled. Our specialists are not only for the cadres, but also, and indeed chiefly, for the masses. Our specialists in literature should pay attention to the wall newspapers of the masses and to the reportage written in the army and the villages. Our specialists in drama should pay attention to the small troops in the army and the villages. Our specialists in music should pay attention to the songs of the masses. Our specialists in the fine arts should pay attention to the fine arts of the masses. All these comrades should make close contact with comrades engaged in the work of popularizing literature and art among the masses. On the one hand, they should help and guide the popularizers, and on the other, they should learn from these comrades and through them, draw nourishment from the masses to replenish and enrich themselves, so that their specialities do not become ivory towers, detached from the masses and from reality and devoid of content or life. We should esteem the specialists, for they are very valuable to our cause, but we should tell them that no revolutionary writer or artist can do any meaningful work unless he is closely linked with the masses, gives expression to their thoughts and feelings, and serves them as a loyal spokesman. Only by speaking for the masses can he educate them, and only by being their pupil can he be their teacher. If he regards himself as their master, as an aristocrat who lords it over the lower orders, then no matter how talented he may be, he will not be needed by the masses, and his work will have no future. Is this attitude of ours utilitarian? Materialists do not oppose utilitarianism in general, but the utilitarianism of the feudal, bourgeois, and petty bourgeois classes. They oppose those hypocrites who attack utilitarianism in words, but in deeds embrace the most selfish and short-sighted utilitarianism. There is no ism in the world that transcends utilitarian considerations. In class society, there can be only the utilitarianism of this or that class. We are proletarian revolutionary utilitarians, and take as our point of departure the unity of the present and future interests of the broadest masses, who constitute over 90% of the population. Hence, we are revolutionary utilitarians aiming for the broadest and the most long-range objectives, not narrow utilitarians concerned only with the partial and the immediate. If, for instance, you reproach the masses for their utilitarianism and yet for your own utility, or that of a narrow clique, force on the market and propagandize among the masses a work which pleases only the few, but is useless or even harmful to the majority, then you are not only insulting the masses, but also revealing your own lack of self-knowledge. A thing is good only when it brings real benefit to the masses of the people. Your work may be as good as the spring snow, but if for the time being it caters only to the few, and the masses are still singing the song of the rustic poor, you will get nowhere by simply scolding them, instead of trying to raise their level. The spring snow and the song of the rustic poor were songs of the kingdom of Chu in the 3rd century BC. The music of the first was on a higher level than that of the second. As the story is told, in Sung Yu's reply to the king of Chu, in Prince Chao Ming's anthology of prose and poetry, when someone sang "The Spring Snow" in the Chu capital, only a few dozen people joined in. But when the song of the rustic poor was sung, thousands did so. The question now is to bring about a unity between the spring snow and the song of the rustic poor, between higher standards and popularization. Without such a unity, the highest art of any expert cannot help being utilitarian in the narrowest sense. You may call this art pure and lofty, but that is merely your own name for it, which the masses will not endorse. Once we have solved the problems of fundamental policy, of serving the workers, peasants, and soldiers, and of how to serve them, such other problems as whether to write about the bright or the dark side of life, and the problem of unity will also be solved. If everyone agrees on the fundamental policy, it should be adhered to by all our workers, all our schools, publications, and organizations in the field of literature and art, and in all our literary and artistic activities. It is wrong to depart from this policy, and anything at variance with it must be duly corrected. Since our literature and art are for the masses of the people, we can proceed to discuss a problem of inter-party relations, i.e., the relation between the party's work in literature and art, and the party's work as a whole, and in addition, a problem of the party's external relations, i.e., the relation between the party's work in literature and art, and the work of non-party people in this field, a problem of the united front in literary and art circles. Let us consider the first problem. In the world today, all culture, all literature and art belong to definite classes and are geared to definite political lines. There is, in fact, no such thing as art for art's sake, art that stands above classes or art that is detached from or independent of politics. Proletarian literature and art are part of the whole proletarian revolutionary cause. They are, as Lenin said, cogs and wheels in the whole revolutionary machine. C. V.I. Lenin, Party Organization and Party Literature.
Literature must become part of the common cause of the proletariat, a cog and a screw of one single great social democratic mechanism set in motion by the entire politically conscious vanguard of the entire working class.
Therefore, party work in literature and art occupies a definite and assigned position in party revolutionary work as a whole, and is subordinated to the revolutionary tasks set by the party in a given revolutionary period. Opposition to this arrangement is certain to lead to dualism or pluralism, and in essence amounts to politics is Marxist, art is bourgeois, as with Trotsky. We do not favor overstressing the importance of literature and art, but neither do we favor underestimating their importance. Literature and art are subordinate to politics, but in their turn exert a great influence on politics. Revolutionary literature and art are part of the whole revolutionary cause. They are cogs and wheels in it, and though in comparison with certain other and more important parts, they may be less significant and less urgent, and may occupy a secondary position. Nevertheless, they are indispensable cogs and wheels in the whole machine, an indispensable part of the entire revolutionary cause. If we had no literature and art, even in the broadest and most ordinary sense, we could not carry on the revolutionary movement and win victory. Failure to recognize this is wrong. Furthermore, when we say that literature and art are subordinate to politics, we mean class politics, the politics of the masses, not the politics of a few so-called statesmen. Politics, whether revolutionary or counter-revolutionary, is the struggle of class against class, not the activity of a few individuals. The revolutionary struggle on the ideological and artistic fronts must be subordinate to the political struggle, because only through politics can the needs of the class and the masses find expression in concentrated form. Revolutionary statesmen, the political specialists who know the science or art of revolutionary politics, are simply the leaders of millions upon millions of statesmen, the masses. Their task is to collect the opinions of these mass statesmen, sift and refine them, and return them to the masses, who then take them and put them into practice. They are therefore not the kind of aristocratic statesmen who work behind closed doors and fancy they have a monopoly of wisdom. Herein lies the difference in principle between proletarian statesmen and decadent bourgeois statesmen. This is precisely why there can be complete unity between the political character of our literary and artistic works and their truthfulness. It would be wrong to fail to realize this and to debase the politics and the statesmen of the proletariat. Let us consider next the question of the united front in the world of literature and art. Since literature and art are subordinate to politics, and since the fundamental problem in China's politics today is resistance to Japan, our party writers and artists must in the first place unite on this issue of resistance to Japan with all non-party writers and artists, ranging from party sympathizers and petty bourgeois writers and artists to all those writers and artists of the bourgeois and landlord classes who are in favor of resistance to Japan. Secondly, we should unite with them on the issue of democracy. On this issue, there is a section of anti-Japanese writers and artists who do not agree with us, so the range of unity will unavoidably be somewhat more limited. Thirdly, we should unite with them on issues peculiar to the literary and artistic world, questions of method and style in literature and art. Here again, as we are for socialist realism and some people do not agree, the range of unity will be narrower still. While on one issue there is unity, on another there is struggle, there is criticism. The issues are at once separate and interrelated, so that even on the very ones which give rise to unity, such as resistance to Japan, there are at the same time struggle and criticism. In a united front, all unity and no struggle and all struggle and no unity are both wrong policies, as with the right capitulationism and tailism, or the left exclusivism and sectarianism practiced by some comrades in the past. This is as true in literature and art as in politics. The petty bourgeois writers and artists constitute an important force among the forces of the United Front in literary and art circles in China. There are many shortcomings in both their thinking and their works, but, comparatively speaking, they are inclined towards the revolution and are close to the working people. Therefore, it is an especially important task to help them overcome their shortcomings and to win them over to the front, which serves the working people. Literary and art criticism is one of the principal methods of struggle in the world of literature and art. It should be developed and, as comrades have rightly pointed out, our past work in this respect has been quite inadequate. Literary and art criticism is a complex question which requires a great deal of special study. Here, I shall concentrate only on the basic problem of criteria in criticism. I shall also comment briefly on a few specific problems raised by some comrades and on certain incorrect views. In literary and art criticism, there are two criteria, the political and the artistic. According to the political criterion, everything is good that is helpful to unity and resistance to Japan, that encourages the masses to be of one heart and one mind, that opposes retrogression and promotes progress. On the other hand, everything is bad that is detrimental to unity and resistance to Japan, foments dissension and discord among the masses, and opposes progress and drags people back. How can we tell the good from the bad? By the motive, the subjective intention, or by the effect, social practice? Idealists stress motive and ignore effect, while mechanical materialists stress effect and ignore motive. In contradistinction to both, we dialectical materialists insist on the unity of motive and effect. The motive of serving the masses is inseparably linked with the effect of winning their approval. The two must be united. The motive of serving the individual or a small clique is not good, nor is it good to have the motive of serving the masses without the effect of winning their approval and benefiting them. In examining the subjective intention of a writer or artist, that is, whether his motive is correct and good, we do not judge by his declarations, but by the effect of his actions, mainly his works, on the masses in society. The criterion for judging subjective intention or motive is social practice and its effect. We want no sectarianism in our literary and art criticism, and, subject to the general principle of unity for resistance to Japan, we should tolerate literary and art works with a variety of political attitudes. But at the same time, in our criticism, we must adhere firmly to principle and severely criticize and repudiate all works of literature and art, expressing views in opposition to the nation, to science, to the masses, and to the Communist Party, because these so-called works of literature and art proceed from the motive and produce the effect of undermining unity for resistance to Japan. According to the artistic criterion, all works of a higher artistic quality are good or comparatively good, while those of a lower artistic quality are bad or comparatively bad. Here too, of course, social effect must be taken into account. There is hardly a writer or artist who does not consider his own work beautiful, and our criticism ought to permit the free competition of all varieties of works of art. But it is also entirely necessary to subject these works to correct criticism according to the criteria of the science of aesthetics, so that art of a lower level can be gradually raised to a higher, and art, which does not meet the demands of the struggle of the broad masses, can be transformed into art that does. There is the political criterion, and there is the artistic criterion. What is the relationship between the two? Politics cannot be equated with art, nor can a general world outlook be equated with a method of artistic creation and criticism. We deny not only that there is an abstract and absolutely unchangeable political criterion, but also that there is an abstract and absolutely unchangeable artistic criterion. Each class, in every class society, has its own political and artistic criteria. But all classes in all class societies invariably put the political criterion first and the artistic criterion second. The bourgeoisie always shuts out proletarian literature and art, however great their artistic merit. The proletariat must similarly distinguish among the literary and art works of past ages and determine its attitude towards them only after examining their attitude to the people and whether or not they had any progressive significance historically. Some works which politically are downright reactionary may have a certain artistic quality. The more reactionary their content and the higher their artistic quality, the more poisonous they are to the people, and the more necessary it is to reject them. A common characteristic of the literature and art of all exploiting classes in their period of decline is the contradiction between their reactionary political content and their artistic form. What we demand is the unity of politics and art, the unity of content and form, the unity of revolutionary political content, and the highest possible perfection of artistic form. Works of art which lack artistic quality have no force, however progressive they are politically. Therefore, we oppose both the tendency to produce works of art with a wrong political viewpoint and the tendency towards the poster and slogan style, which is correct in political viewpoint, but lacking in artistic power. On questions of literature and art, we must carry on a struggle on two fronts. Both these tendencies can be found in the thinking of many comrades. A good number of comrades tend to neglect artistic technique. It is therefore necessary to give attention to the raising of artistic standards. But as I see it, the political side is more of a problem at present. Some comrades lack elementary political knowledge, and consequently have all sorts of muddled ideas. Let me cite a few examples from YENAN. The theory of human nature. Is there such a thing as human nature? Of course there is. But there is only human nature in the concrete, no human nature in the abstract. In class society, there is only human nature of a class character. There is no human nature above classes. We uphold the human nature of the proletariat and of the masses of the people, while the landlord and bourgeois classes uphold the human nature of their own classes. Only they do not say so, but make it out to be the only human nature in existence. The human nature boosted by certain petty bourgeois intellectuals is also divorced from or opposed to the masses. What they call human nature is in essence nothing but bourgeois individualism. And so, in their eyes, proletarian human nature is contrary to human nature. The theory of human nature, which some people in YENAN advocate as the basis of their so-called theory of literature and art, puts the matter in just this way and is wholly wrong. The fundamental point of departure for literature and art is love, love of humanity. Now, love may serve as a point of departure, but there is a more basic one. Love as an idea is a product of objective practice. Fundamentally, we do not start from ideas, but from objective practice. Our writers and artists who come from the ranks of the intellectuals love the proletariat, because society has made them feel that they and the proletariat share a common fate. We hate Japanese imperialism, because Japanese imperialism oppresses us. There is absolutely no such thing in the world as love or hatred without reason or cause. As for the so-called love of humanity, there has been no such all-inclusive love since humanity was divided into classes. All the ruling classes of the past were fond of advocating it, and so were many so-called sages and wise men. But nobody has ever really practiced it, because it is impossible in class society. There will be genuine love of humanity after classes are eliminated all over the world. Classes have split society into many antagonistic groupings. There will be love of all humanity when classes are eliminated, but not now. We cannot love enemies. We cannot love social evils. Our aim is to destroy them. This is common sense. Can it be that some of our writers and artists still do not understand this? Literary and artistic works have always laid equal stress on the bright and the dark, half and half. This statement contains many muddled ideas. It is not true that literature and art have always done this. Many petty bourgeois writers have never discovered the bright side. Their works only expose the dark and are known as the literature of exposure. Some of their works simply specialize in preaching pessimism and world weariness. On the other hand, Soviet literature in the period of socialist construction portrays mainly the bright. It, too, describes shortcomings in work and portrays negative characters, but this only serves as a contrast to bring out the brightness of the whole picture, and is not on a so-called half-and-half basis. The writers and artists of the bourgeoisie in its period of reaction depict the revolutionary masses as mobs, and themselves as saints, thus reversing the bright and the dark. Only truly revolutionary writers and artists can correctly solve the problem of whether to extol or to expose. All the dark forces harming the masses of the people must be exposed, and all the revolutionary struggles of the masses of the people must be extolled. This is the fundamental task of revolutionary writers and artists. The task of literature and art has always been to expose. This assertion, like the previous one, arises from ignorance of the science of history. Literature and art, as we have shown, have never been devoted solely to exposure. For revolutionary writers and artists, the targets for exposure can never be the masses, but only the aggressors, exploiters, and oppressors, and the evil influence they have on the people. The masses, too, have shortcomings, which should be overcome by criticism and self-criticism within the people's own ranks, and such criticism and self-criticism is also one of the most important tasks of literature and art. But this should not be regarded as any sort of exposure of the people. As for the people, the question is basically one of education and of raising their level. Only counter-revolutionary writers and artists describe the people as born fools, and the revolutionary masses as tyrannical mobs. This is still the period of the satirical essay, and Lu Xun's style of writing is still needed. Living under the rule of the dark forces and deprived of freedom of speech, Lu Xun used burning satire and freezing irony, cast in the form of essays, to do battle. And he was entirely right. We, too, must hold up to sharp ridicule the fascists, the Chinese reactionaries, and everything that harms the people. But in the Shensi-Kansu-Ningxia border region and the anti-Japanese base areas behind the enemy lines, where democracy and freedom are granted in full to the revolutionary writers and artists and withheld only from the counter-revolutionaries, the style of the essay should not simply be like Lu Xun's. Here we can shout at the top of our voices and have no need for veiled and roundabout expressions, which are hard for the people to understand. When dealing with the people and not with their enemies, Lu Xun never ridiculed or attacked the revolutionary people and the Revolutionary Party in his satirical essay period. And these essays were entirely different in manner from those directed against the enemy. To criticize the people's shortcomings is necessary, as we have already said, but in doing so, we must truly take the stand of the people and speak out of wholehearted eagerness to protect and educate them. To treat comrades like enemies is to go over to the stand of the enemy. Are we then to abolish satire? No. Satire is always necessary. But there are several kinds of satire, each with a different attitude. Satire to deal with our enemies, satire to deal with our allies, and satire to deal with our own ranks. We are not opposed to satire in general, What we must abolish is the abuse of satire.
I am not given to praise and eulogy. The works of people who eulogize what is bright are not necessarily great, and the works of those who depict the dark are not necessarily paltry.
If you are a bourgeois writer or artist, you will eulogize not the proletariat, but the bourgeoisie. And if you are a proletarian writer or artist, you will eulogize not the bourgeoisie, but the proletariat and working people. It must be one or the other. The works of the eulogists of the bourgeoisie are not necessarily great, nor are the works of those who show that the bourgeoisie is dark necessarily paltry. The works of the eulogists of the proletariat are not necessarily not great, but the works of those who depict the so-called darkness of the proletariat are bound to be paltry. Are these not facts of history as regards literature and art? Why should we not eulogize the people, the creators of the history of mankind? Why should we not eulogize the proletariat, the Communist Party, New Democracy, and socialism? There is a type of person who has no enthusiasm for the people's cause and looks coldly from the sidelines at the struggles and victories of the proletariat and its vanguard. What he is interested in, and will never weary of eulogizing, is himself, plus perhaps a few figures in his small coterie. Of course, such petty bourgeois individualists are unwilling to eulogize the deeds and virtues of the revolutionary people, or heighten their courage in struggle and their confidence in victory. Persons of this type are merely termites in the revolutionary ranks. Of course, the revolutionary people have no need for these singers.
It is not a question of stand. My class stand is correct, my intentions are good, and I understand all right, but I am not good at expressing myself, and so the effect turns out bad.
I have already spoken about the dialectical materialist view of motive and effect. Now I want to ask, is not the question of effect one, of stand? A person who acts solely by motive and does not inquire what effect his action will have is like a doctor who merely writes prescriptions but does not care how many patients die of them, or take a political party which merely makes declarations but does not care whether they are carried out. It may well be asked, is this a correct stand? And is the intention here good? Of course, mistakes may occur even though the effect has been taken into account beforehand, but is the intention good when one continues in the same old rut after facts have proved that the effect is bad? In judging a party or a doctor, we must look at practice, at the effect. The same applies in judging a writer. A person with truly good intentions must take the effect into account, sum up experience and study the methods, or in creative work, study the technique of expression. A person with truly good intentions must criticize the shortcomings and mistakes in his own work with the utmost candor and resolve to correct them. This is precisely why communists employ the method of self-criticism. This alone is the correct stand. Only in this process of serious and responsible practice is it possible gradually to understand what the correct stand is, and gradually obtain a good grasp of it. If one does not move in this direction in practice, if there is simply the complacent assertion that one understands all right, then in fact, one has not understood at all. To call on us to study Marxism is to repeat the mistake of the dialectical materialist creative method, which will harm the creative mood.
To study Marxism means to apply the dialectical materialist and historical materialist viewpoint in our observation of the world, of society, and of literature and art. It does not mean writing philosophical lectures into our works of literature and art. Marxism embraces but cannot replace realism in literary and artistic creation, just as it embraces but cannot replace the atomic and electronic theories in physics. Empty, dry, dogmatic formulas do indeed destroy the creative mood. Not only that, they first destroy Marxism. Dogmatic Marxism is not Marxism, it is anti-Marxism. Then does not Marxism destroy the creative mood? Yes, it does. It definitely destroys creative moods that are feudal, bourgeois, petty bourgeois, liberalistic, individualist, nihilist, art for art's sake, aristocratic, decadent, or pessimistic, and every other creative mood that is alien to the masses of the people and to the proletariat. So far as proletarian writers and artists are concerned, should not these kinds of creative moods be destroyed? I think they should. They should be utterly destroyed. And while they are being destroyed, something new can be constructed.
The problems discussed here exist in our literary and art circles in YENAN. What does that show? It shows that wrong styles of work still exist to a serious extent in our literary and art circles, and that there are still many defects among our comrades, such as idealism, dogmatism, empty illusions, empty talk, contempt for practice, and aloofness from the masses, all of which call for an effective and serious campaign of rectification. We have many comrades who are still not very clear on the difference between the proletariat and the petty bourgeoisie. There are many party members who have joined the Communist Party organizationally, but have not yet joined the party wholly or at all ideologically. Those who have not joined the party ideologically still carry a great deal of the muck of the exploiting classes in their heads and have no idea at all of what proletarian ideology or communism or the party is. Proletarian ideology, they think, the same old stuff. Little do they know that it is no easy matter to acquire this stuff. Some will never have the slightest communist flavor about them as long as they live and can only end up by leaving the party. Therefore, though the majority in our party and in our ranks are clean and honest, we must in all seriousness put things in order both ideologically and organizationally if we are to develop the revolutionary movement more effectively and bring it to speedier success. To put things in order organizationally requires our first doing so ideologically, our launching a struggle of proletarian ideology against non-proletarian ideology. An ideological struggle is already underway in literary and art circles in YENAN, and it is most necessary. Intellectuals of petty bourgeois origin always stubbornly try in all sorts of ways, including literary and artistic ways, to project themselves and spread their views, and they want the party and the world to be remolded in their own image. In the circumstances, it is our duty to jolt these comrades and tell them sharply, that won't work. The proletariat cannot accommodate itself to you. To yield to you would actually be to yield to the big landlord class and the big bourgeoisie, and to run the risk of undermining our party and our country. Whom then must we yield to? We can mold the party and the world only in the image of the proletarian vanguard. We hope our comrades in literary and art circles will realize the seriousness of this great debate and join actively in this struggle, so that every comrade may become sound, and our entire ranks may become truly united and consolidated, ideologically and organizationally. Because of confusion in their thinking, many of our comrades are not quite able to draw a real distinction between our revolutionary base areas and the Kuomintang areas, and they make many mistakes as a consequence. A good number of comrades have come here from the garrets of Shanghai, and in coming from those garrets to the revolutionary base areas, they have passed not only from one kind of place to another, but from one historical epoch to another. One society is semi-feudal, semi-colonial, under the rule of the big landlords and big bourgeoisie. The other is a revolutionary new democratic society under the leadership of the proletariat. To come to the revolutionary bases means to enter an epoch unprecedented in the thousands of years of Chinese history, an epoch in which the masses of the people wield state power. Here the people around us and the audience for our propaganda are totally different. The past epoch is gone, never to return. Therefore, we must integrate ourselves with the new masses without any hesitation. If living among the new masses, some comrades, as I said before, are still lacking in knowledge and understanding, and remain heroes with no place to display their prowess, then difficulties will arise for them. And not only when they go out to the villages, right here in YENAN, difficulties will arise for them. Some comrades may think, well, I had better continue writing for the readers in the Great Rear Area. It is a job I know well and has national significance.
Footnote. The Great Rear Area was the name given during the War of Resistance to the vast areas under Kuomintang control in southwestern and northwestern China, which were not occupied by the Japanese invaders, as distinguished from the Small Rear Area, the anti-Japanese base areas behind the enemy lines under the leadership of the Communist Party. End of footnote.
This idea is entirely wrong. The Great Rear Area is also changing. Readers there expect authors in the revolutionary base areas to tell about the new people and the new world and not to bore them with the same old tales. Therefore, the more a work is written for the masses in the revolutionary base areas, the more national significance will it have. Fadeev in The Debacle only told the story of a small guerrilla unit and had no intention of pandering to the palate of readers in the old world. Yet the book has exerted worldwide influence. The Debacle, by the famous Soviet writer Alexander Fadeev, was published in 1927 and translated into Chinese by Lu Xun. The novel describes the struggle of a partisan detachment of workers, peasants, and revolutionary intellectuals in Siberia against the counter-revolutionary brigands during the Soviet Civil War. At any rate, in China, its influence is very great, as you know. China is moving forward, not back, and it is the revolutionary base areas, not any of the backward, retrogressive areas, that are leading China forward. This is a fundamental issue that, above all, comrades must come to understand in the rectification movement. Since integration into the new epoch of the masses is essential, it is necessary thoroughly to solve the problem of the relationship between the individual and the masses. This couplet from a poem by Lu Xun should be our motto.
Fierce-browed, I coolly defy 1,000 pointing fingers. Head bowed, like a willing ox I serve the children.
This couplet is from Lu Xun's In Mockery of Myself. The 1,000 pointing fingers are our enemies, and we will never yield to them, no matter how ferocious. The children here symbolize the proletariat and the masses. All communists, all revolutionary literary and art workers should learn from the example of Lu Xun and be oxen for the proletariat and the masses, bending their backs to the task until their dying day. Intellectuals who want to integrate themselves with the masses, who want to serve the masses, must go through a process in which they and the masses come to know each other well. This process may, and certainly will, involve much pain and friction, but if you have the determination, you will be able to fulfill these requirements. Today, I have discussed only some of the problems of fundamental orientation for our literature and art movement. Many specific problems remain, which will require further study. I am confident that comrades here are determined to move in the direction indicated. I believe that in the course of the rectification movement and in the long period of study and work to come, you will surely be able to bring about a transformation in yourselves and in your works, to create many fine works which will be warmly welcomed by the masses of the people, and to advance the literature and art movement in the revolutionary base areas and throughout China to a glorious new stage. End of section 8.